welcome to What's Happening Canada. I'm your host, Martin Cook. As this is our first show, let me tell you a little bit about what to expect. On each episode, we're going to examine a specific issue of importance in Canada. We're going to try to explain the problems and hopefully explore some solutions to topics that affect the lives of Canadians. Think of it a little like a lecture that you're choosing to watch for some reason, but with the added benefit that you aren't being graded. Now, some of you might be thinking, wait a second, this show sounds an awful lot like Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. And you know what, smartass? You're not wrong. We are blatantly stealing the format of that show. I might as well call this Next Month Tomorrow with Oliver John, except without the budget and resources of HBO. For example, say hello to my hair and makeup team. He's the best. Look, some of you may feel that doing a bastardized copy of a popular and successful show is the equivalent of restoring a 100-year-old fresco like this. But hopefully, there are some that will see the beauty in the deranged Monkey Man version that we're presenting to you. And while that HBO show focuses mostly on problems in the country to the south of the 49th parallel, we've got our own special set of issues here in Canada that deserve attention. For this first episode, we thought we'd start with a relatively simple issue and talk about daycare. Specifically, the lack of a national daycare strategy, policy, or program in Canada. Now, we know when people outside of this country think about Canadian daycare, this is often what they're imagining. Okay, sure, fair enough. But this is actually a crucial issue. Because if this past year has taught us anything, it's that having parents just work from home and be expected to also take care of children will result in one of two things. Either parents going utterly and completely insane, or children being entirely raised and educated by Peppa Pig and fucking Paw Patrol. A national daycare strategy is something that politicians in this country have been talking about for decades, but have never really done anything about. Sort of like me in getting back into shape. I keep saying that I'll do something about it, but instead, by the end of each new day, I've sat on my ass watching Netflix and consuming a whole jar of peanut butter. Delicious. To be fair, the government of Paul Martin, remember him? No, that's Dean Martin. Nope, that's Paul McCartney. There he is. And just for the hell of it, here he is wearing a funny hat. Here he is explaining how he was visited by the ghost of Jacob Marley after his 8th austerity budget in a row in the 90s. And finally, here he is looking into the mirror and telling himself, damn, I look like a sexy beast in this tiger shirt. Anyway, his government actually did try to implement a national childcare program in 2005. They earmarked $5 billion for it and everything, and had begun to work with all 10 provinces before losing an election to Stephen Harper's Conservatives. The Conservatives then came in and said, wait, this isn't something the federal government should do. Let's just cancel the program and leave it up to the provinces. It'll surprise no one to hear that the provinces, with the exception of Quebec, then proceeded to do exactly jack shit. So, for the next several election cycles, politicians of all political parties would randomly bring up the idea of national daycare, holding it out tantalizingly for the voters before yanking it away again when time came to actually implement anything, like Lucy pulling the football away. You'd think by now, Charlie Brown and we would have learned. Which brings us to the most recent throne speech, a weird form of political ventriloquy where the Governor General moves her mouth and the Prime Minister's words come out. And guess what workplace harassment Charlie McCarthy had to say?
We have long understood that Canada cannot succeed if half the population is held back. Canadians need more accessible, affordable, inclusive, and high-quality childcare. Recognizing the urgency of this challenge, the government will make a significant, long-term, sustained investment to create a Canada-wide early learning and childcare system.
It's back! Yet another promise from yet another government about daycare. Now, it does seem as if the Trudeau Liberals are sincere about their desire to support a national daycare strategy. However, it's also fair to ask whether or not this will actually happen. First, they'll need to come up with a plan, then work with the provinces to develop it, and finally, find and allocate funding for it in the budget. By the time all that happens, there's a very good chance we'll be well into another election. Both the Liberals and Conservatives seem quite content to drive us towards another unnecessary election in the hopes of getting a majority in the House of Commons. And only the confusion of the NDP about who their supporters actually are is currently providing a temporary reprieve. The Liberal government doubled down on promising action on national daycare in the recent fall economic update by Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, and I'm assuming the government's chief carpool organizer, party planner, and the one who turns the lights out in the cabinet office every night, Chrystia Freeland.
Mr. Speaker, we know that COVID-19 is rolling back many of the gains Canadian women have fought for and won in my lifetime. That is why today, as part of our commitment to an action plan for women in the economy, we are laying the foundation for a Canada-wide early learning and child care system.
However, the Trudeau government has been a little short on specifics about this plan, or as Global News put it,
one of the promises in the throne speech is a big investment in childcare. A national childcare program is not a new idea. It's just never been delivered. And lots of details are missing from this promise, like how much will be invested and where the money will come from.
Yeah, any government funding plan that has no idea how much money it needs or where the money will come from is a little like my plan to one day own the Toronto Raptors. With both of them, it would be perfectly fair for someone to say, sounds great. How the fuck are you going to do that? The only real concrete thing that came out of the fall economic update by Finance Minister, Uber driver, understudy sergeant-at-arms, probably, was a commitment to providing families with a temporary one-time support of up to $1,200 under the Canada Child Benefit. And considering the exorbitant cost of daycare for Canadian families, especially those in urban centres like Toronto and Vancouver, that plan is a little like offering to tie the boots of the guy who's about to climb Mount Everest. Sure, it's a nice gesture, I guess, but it's not really going to get him to the top of the fucking mountain, is it? So, rather than hold our breath for the miracle of fulfilled government promise, let's take a look at this issue and try to answer a few basic questions. First of all, why might we want a universal childcare in Canada? What are the issues or problems that such a system might hope to address? Secondly, is this something worth exploring? What evidence do we have that instituting a universal childcare policy would actually have a positive effect on those issues or problems? And thirdly, what are some of the obstacles and complications that make the implementation of a national daycare policy difficult? So, why might we want universal childcare? The answer is simple. Women. More specifically, the gender pay gap that continues to inflict our country and economy despite some improvements over the years. If you took a look at the gender wage gap by hourly pay, you would see that, according to Statistics Canada, women earned an average of 87 cents for every dollar earned by men in 2015. That's not great, obviously, but you might be thinking, I thought I'd heard numbers that make it sound much worse. And yes, you have. Because when you consider average annual earnings by gender, women earn only an average of 69 cents for every dollar earned by men. And what's more shocking is just how quickly that disparity starts to manifest itself, as one recent report discovered.
A report by the University of Ottawa and the Labour Market Information Council tracked earnings for all graduates of publicly funded post-secondary institutions in Canada using StatsCan data, from college certificates to PhDs, between 2010 and 2015. On average, it found women earned 12% less than men 1 year after graduation, $5,700. That widened to 25% less, $17,700, by year 5.
None of this is new, of course. It's a problem we've been trying to find legal solutions to for decades. But much like a coworker's vacation pictures on Instagram, it's a little depressing how far reality can be from the ideal that's presented to us.
Pay equity has actually been a human right since 1977, protected under the Canadian Human Rights Act. That means the Human Rights Commission hears pay equity complaints, investigates, and attempts to resolve them. But that approach hasn't really worked. In 2004, an independent pay equity task force found that it was an inadequate foundation for significant and systematic progress, and recommended making pay equity law.
The government actually did finally pass legislation in 2018 with parliamentary approval of the Pay Equity Act. However, It has to be said that even legislation can only go so far. Sometimes society and the free market need a little nudge in the form of actual programs. For instance, you could pass a law saying that bootlegged recordings of my drunken karaoke efforts should sell as much as the latest single by The Weeknd. But unless you put actual money behind it, it's unlikely to happen. Look, there are a lot of reasons for pay inequity in Canada, but one major contributing factor is that despite the fact that society has evolved somewhat, women are still seen as the primary caregivers for children. And so, even when they do work, women are much more likely than men to work part-time. And if they do work full-time, they work fewer hours. And now we've got this fucking asshole. In addition to affecting poor and minority communities at a higher rate than the national average, the COVID pandemic has also meant that women have been leaving the workforce at a faster rate than men, reversing some of the progress of recent years. All this to say that if we're serious about upholding the right to pay equity, we should also be serious about ensuring that adequate and accessible daycare options are available to Canadian families. And right now, they are absolutely not.
Now to some startling numbers. Over 700,000 Canadian children live in parts of the country that don't have available daycare spaces. That is according to a new study. CTV's Molly Thomas is following the story for us this morning. Molly, what have you got for us?
Well, Marcia, experts are calling these child care deserts. So these are specifically areas where 3 or more children have access to just one licensed spot. And that's happening in 44% of our country, 44%.
I have to say, I appreciate Molly Thomas's redundancy there. The fact that 44% of Canadians live in areas where there is not adequate daycare is a startling figure. So there's definitely a problem, and parents of young children probably didn't need to hear me rattle on for hours to know that. So let's move on to the next question. What evidence is there that a daycare program would actually address some of these issues, including the gender pay gap? Well, luckily, we don't have to look very far for evidence, because La Belle Province of Quebec has been doing this for a while. Yes, in addition to leading the way in excellent hockey franchises, racist sartorial legislation, and hyphenated first names, Quebec has also been leading the way in daycare strategy for more than 2 decades. And according to a paper submitted to the Standing Committee on the Status of Women by economics professor Pierre Fortin in 2017, the effects of Quebec's policies have been clear. His research found that between 1997 and 2016, the labor force participation rate of women aged 20 to 44 in Quebec rose from 76% to 85%, compared to a much smaller rise of only 78% to 80% in all other provinces. More specifically, he also found that between 1998 and 2014, the labor force participation rates of women aged 20 to 44 with children from 0 to 5 years of age rose in Quebec from 66% to 79%. In the rest of the country, that same measure rose by only 4 points. I will point out that the professor warned against falling into the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy, by far the favorite logical fallacy of my friends and I in the debating club back at university. Oh yes, I'm that special kind of geek. The kind that believes that discussing logical fallacies using their Latin names over a few pints is a fun university experience. And it was, damn it. Watch it, or I'll cut you with my rhetoric. But getting back to Professor Fortin, he went on to state that even though post hoc ergo propter hoc is a problem in some studies, several researchers from UQAM, Toronto, UBC, and Queen's have been able to confirm that Quebec's childcare reforms beginning in the late 90s did have a causal impact on the employment of mothers in that province. So what does this all tell us? Aside from the fact that I probably shouldn't be blaming the COVID pandemic for my lack of a sex life, it tells us that evidence strongly suggests that a robust daycare program can make a difference towards eliminating some of the problems that we talked about at the top, the massive wage gap between men and women, and the lower rate of participation of women in the workforce. And for all you heartless dollars and cents capitalists out there, there's something in this for you too. That same study estimated that the Quebec daycare program had resulted in 70,000 more women entering the formal economy, adding approximately $5 billion to the province's GDP. Concerned about the strain on the government's already stretched budget? Well, there's good news there also.
But economists point out the Quebec program pays for itself.
For every $100 in subsidized care in Quebec, the Quebec government got $104 in new provincial income taxes.
Yeah, the program pays for itself. Unlike that one friend who always asks to borrow money, promising that they'll get you back, and then the next time you go out, they still haven't paid you back, but need to borrow more, and then you try to bring it up, but there's never a good time to tell someone that they're a freeloading leech. And then the next time you plan to go out and ready to say something, they get hit by a car while riding their bike in a bicycle lane, and then you really don't think it's appropriate to bring it up because, they're in hospital, but at the same time, you kind of still want your money. Yeah, unlike that friend, this program actually pays for itself. So, as long as you go in for the idea that government should actually try to improve the lives of its citizens, let's continue on and take a look at some of the obstacles that might exist to making such a thing a reality. The first obstacle is pushback from those who might disagree with my previous statement and don't think that this is what the government should be doing at all. This has tended to be the view of the Conservative Party, and is summed up nicely here by Conservative MP Jamie Schmale.
And if you're giving parents more money back in their pockets, they're better able to choose what is best in their situation.
The thing is, Jamie, there are a number of problems with that. First of all, programs like Child Tax Benefit have done little to address the scarcity of daycare facilities and openings. There's a big difference between putting money in parents' pockets and putting funding towards an actual daycare system in terms of improved daycare becoming a reality. There is also something that seems a little unfair about monetary benefits to parents from a wide range of economic backgrounds and employment and living circumstances. Watch Cynthia Loist from CTV's The Social try to explain this uncomfortable feeling, while at the same time, her son provides us with an excellent example of why daycare might be necessary, even for parents who are working from home.
I think that we need to think about it in a more complex way. Like I remember, I think it was the Paul Martin government had tried to do, look at this. This is work life right now. I think it was the Paul Martin government had proposed to create thousands of childcare spots across the country, and that was turfed out when the Harper government came in. And then the Harper government started to do this government subsidy. And I remember, Lainey, I remember telling you when I was starting work at The Social, and I was getting these checks in, and I felt like it wasn't appropriate. That I didn't need it in the same way that I knew certain single moms in my life needed it. And so I think just the idea of arbitrarily sending out a check is not necessarily the answer to comprehensive childcare. I think we need spots, potentially, and we don't need spots across the board. We need also more flexible workplaces where we can have them.
Can we just take a minute and acknowledge how great that kid is? More than anything, I admire his commitment to the bit. Long after the rest of him was off screen, he kept doing that weird hand puppet thing the entire time while his mom was trying to talk on national television. And even then, she concluded by turning and giving him that look. I don't know what he was trying to do there, but you know he paid the price for his art, and he should be appreciated for his sacrifice. But moving past the Conservative Party's lame-ass, here's some money, let's just let somebody else deal with it arguments, it is true that this is a very complicated issue, in part because government inactivity over the years has led to a patchwork of laws, programs, and daycare providers across all provinces. Even in Quebec, studies have found a significant variation in quality between the publicly subsidized non-profit childcare centers, the Centre de la Petite Enfance, or CPEs, and the private childcare centers and home-based options that exist, largely because, despite the significant investment of the Quebec government, there still aren't enough CPEs to meet demand. In British Columbia, for instance, the patchwork of different programs means that someone running a home-based daycare will usually first apply to be licensed and then undergo inspections for that. Then, if they want their clients to have a reduced rate under the Parent Fee Reduction Program, they need to opt into that plan. And then there is an additional child subsidy program. That means that each month, a home-based daycare provider first needs to invoice their clients, then determine which ones are eligible for the parent fee reduction and child subsidies, and by how much, take that amount off their bills, then file for the recuperation of that money from the government to those two different programs. It's a lot of paperwork for people who are spending their days trying to prevent 6 or 7 children from hurting each other, hurting themselves, escaping, or burning down the home where the daycare provider also lives. We need more daycare providers. We shouldn't be making it increasingly complicated for them. And that doesn't even get into salaries for employees that work at the larger daycare centers, which often aren't competitive at all, and certainly do little to attract people with degrees in early childhood education. So yes, it's complicated, and there are a lot of issues to navigate. We haven't even had time to get into the fact that daycare is technically a provincial responsibility, and so the federal government will have to work together with all the provinces to come to an agreement on whatever plan ends up being proposed. But you remember this bastard? Yeah, hard to forget, right? Well, that life-destroying little monster is also an opportunity, a chance to rebuild our economy in a way that's even better than it was before. Not only do we need to address the fact that the pandemic has disproportionately affected women more than men economically, we also should ensure that whatever reconstruction plan is developed moves us beyond where we were in February 2020. To that end, a new report by the Centre for Future Work recommends that early learning and childcare should play a key role in rebuilding Canada's economy after COVID-19. By the way, if you told 10-year-old me that I'd be reading something by the Centre for Future Work and that it turned out to have nothing to do with space colonies or jetpacks, I would have been extremely disappointed. Nevertheless, the disappointingly named Centre's report concludes that the introduction of a strong early learning and childcare program as part of the COVID recovery plan could lead to massive financial benefits over the next 10 years, including the creation of over 200,000 new jobs and an eventual increase in national annual GDP at the end of that decade of between $63 and $107 billion. The report concludes by saying, quote, investing in universal ELCC services is an economic no-brainer that will quite literally pay for itself. This is the moment for federal and provincial governments to act quickly to make it happen. They're right. This seems to be the moment. Obviously, there are challenges and difficulties, but there has also never been a better time for the government to make a serious investment in childcare across the country. But if after decades of promises by politicians of all stripes to take this issue seriously, if we still can't make significant progress on a national daycare program now, we might as well just chuck all the kids out on the ice and let them take care of themselves. That's our show. Hope you enjoyed it. Come back and join us next time, Canada.